Yet China is still lying about all of this. They've been lying about it from the very beginning, and you don't need their history of lying about SARS in 2003, though it is relevant. Talk about the biggest and the most important story in the world, the Wuhan coronavirus. This coronavirus is a catastrophe on the scale of Chernobyl for China. But actually, it's probably worse than Chernobyl, which was localized in its effect. The coronavirus could result in a global pandemic. While you were all sleeping overnight, the number of diagnosed cases in China increased by 30%. Now, let me be clear, that's not new cases, that is just newly admitted cases. It is probably several orders of magnitude higher than that. Also, while you were sleeping, China now has its entire border with Russia closed. 2,600 miles. Russia has closed that border. El Al has shut down travel between Israel and China. Air France has shut down travel between China and France. And that's in addition to all the other countries that have already shut down travel. From what we know so far, and there's still many unknowns, this virus could have both a long incubation period, as much as 14 days, and individuals could be contagious while asymptomatic, which was not the case with SARS in 2003. Furthermore, from some cases, it appears that the virus could be aerosolized, which means it doesn't require the kind of contact that you have with, say, a married couple kissing each other or a family living in close quarters in a hotel or apartment, but rather the distances we are all sitting apart right now. Yet China is still lying about all of this. They've been lying about it from the very beginning, and you don't need their history of lying about SARS in 2003, though it is relevant here. You just have to see what's happened over the last 2 months. We now know that the first case manifested no later than December 1, even though China didn't reveal it to the WHO until a month later on December 31st, when they continued to hide it from their own citizens. And they continued to say that it had been contained inside Wuhan. Today, it is in every single province in China. They also claimed for almost 2 months, until earlier this week, that it had originated in a seafood market in Wuhan, that locals had contracted it from animals in, say, bat soup or snake tartare. That is not the case. The Lancet published a study last weekend demonstrating that of the original 40 cases, 14 of them had no contact with the seafood market, including patient 0. As one epidemiologist said, that virus went into the seafood market before it came out of the seafood market. We still don't know where it originated. Could have been another seafood market. Could have been a farm. Could have been a food processing company. I would note that Wuhan also has China's only biosafety level 4 super laboratory that works with the world's most deadly pathogens, to include, yes, coronavirus. Now, look at China's own actions. They have quarantined 60 million people, 60 million, more than the entire population of our West Coast. They've shut down schools indefinitely. Classes canceled nationwide indefinitely. Hong Kong, a part of China, has basically shut down all travel from the mainland. That's why it is essential that we immediately stop all travel on commercial aircraft between China and the United States. Making exceptions, of course, for American citizens to come back, as we just brought back yesterday. Allowing essential trade to flow as long as crews on ships and aircraft are not allowed to go into the general population in America. And making exceptions, of course, for medical personnel to go into China to try to get a handle on this. It is essential that we take those steps, and essential that we get to the bottom of China's deceit and incompetence on this measure. And gentlemen, I raise this with you because you are responsible in your combatant commands for some countries that have the most fragile public institutions, to include the most fragile public health institutions in the world. So I ask, even though as of this morning there are not yet confirmed cases of coronavirus in your combatant commands, though I suspect there will be soon, what is your assessment about the ability of the governments in your combatant commands to handle a potential global pandemic like this, General Townsend?
Thanks, Senator. So there are not, that I'm aware of, any confirmed cases, as you mentioned, but there are some suspected cases. The first report of suspected case I've heard of is in Djibouti, which you would imagine with a significant Chinese presence there. So the capacity of African nations to deal with this problem varies widely. For example, in Eastern Africa, Central East Africa, they've been dealing with Ebola, and they've been dealing with Ebola largely on their own and doing a pretty good job of it. So I think capacity there, but anywhere else in Africa is probably not to that degree.
Admiral Fowler.
The Venezuela crisis has already strained the social services of many of the nations. As you're aware, Senator, we had to deploy the hospital ship Comfort twice in 1 year to last deployment 12 different nations, and in one 5-day span it can do the equivalent of a whole month for a region of some of the major countries. So I would be extremely concerned. Like General Townsend, the capacities vary widely, but in many cases they're strained, and to the limit I'd be very concerned if we saw this spread.
Thank you. As a defensive measure, I'd say again, it is essential that we shut down all commercial air travel immediately between the United States and China. As an offensive measure, because that probably won't stop it entirely, and because if it becomes a global pandemic, we have to deal with countries with very limited capabilities here. We need a Manhattan Project level effort to work with our best research scientists and laboratories in this country to develop a vaccine as quickly as possible.
The U.S. rushed to go in the opposite way. The U.S. is the first country to evacuate its citizens from China, ban its citizens to travel to China, banned all the foreigners who have been to China in the past 40 days to enter into the U.S. The U.S. Commerce Secretary even said that the coronavirus will help bring back jobs to the United States. Certainly not. This is not a gesture of goodwill. You know, what's more, the U.S., as the biggest economy in the world, has not provided any assistance to China on the epidemic issue.
To tire of China bashing. His latest tour was supposed to enhance ties with the UK, Ukraine and Central Asian countries, yet at each stop he routinely warned his hosts of risks in their China ties. He called China's business activities in these countries harmful to their national sovereignty, long-term development and people's interests. In London, he upped the ante in attacking China's political system, saying, while we still have to be enormously vigilant about terror, the Chinese Communist Party presents the central threat of our times. Mr. Pompeo's China bogeyman reminds me of an ancient Chinese fable written more than 2,200 years ago. A man loses his axe and suspects it was stolen by the son of his neighbor, so he observes the boy's behavior, the way he talks and walks and his facial expressions. The more he watches, the more the boy seems exactly like a thief. Later, the man recovers the axe by accident, and the boy turned out to be innocent. This time, when the man observes the boy again, he couldn't find any indications of his original suspicions at all. Nothing really went wrong in the first place, but it's all about perception. That seems to be how some U.S. politicians are seeing China today. It's none of anyone else's business how China organizes itself. China's track record is a good one. The people live twice as long compared to 70 years ago. Over 800 million people stopped living in poverty over the past 4 decades. That's 2.5 times the entire population of the United States. China has been the world's biggest growth engine for more than a dozen years. Compared with many other systems, China is able to mobilize national resources to tackle major challenges. Just look at the latest example, the construction of a hospital with 1,000 beds for patients suffering from the new coronavirus. It took only 10 days to build. 2 more hospitals are expected to be operational within days. Thousands of soldiers, medical staff and workers from different sectors across China have descended on the province of Hubei. China also set a world record in sharing genome information about the virus with the world. So far, only about 150 cases have been confirmed outside of China. The World Health Organization has called China's response a model. While it boasts to have the world's best healthcare system, the U.S. has been one of the first countries to issue sweeping travel restrictions, clearly against the WHO's recommendations. When there was only one confirmed case at home, the U.S. declared a national emergency. Well, the U.S. is free to choose to do so, but let's not forget when the H1N1 flu broke out in 2009, also an international health emergency, U.S. authorities estimated that there were some 61 million people infected and 12,000 people killed between April 2009 and April 2010 in the U.S. And it took the U.S. administration more than 6 months to declare a national emergency. U.S. officials were still welcoming people to explore America. The Chinese Communist Party isn't perfect, but it leads the country effectively, and the great majority of the Chinese people endorse it. Whichever countries feel pressure should sharpen their own competitiveness, not lash out. As the world's most powerful country, the U.S. has every reason to be confident in itself. So Mr. Pompeo and those who are busy peddling China threat or China fear, stop suspecting the neighbor's boy. He didn't take your axe. You have to look for it within your own home.